Good evening. I'm honored to be here tonight and so appreciative of SIF and all of the supporters of SIF for selecting Boston CASA. But I just wanted to, before I get started, say thank you to each and every one of you in this room for being here tonight and stepping forward in this important way. So thank you. What does CASA stand for? Boston CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and we are the only program of our kind in Boston that provides volunteer advocates to children in foster care who have experienced abuse and neglect. Last year, at the end of 2016, in Boston alone, there were 1,830 children who were involved in abuse and neglect cases in our courts, just in Boston. We served 148 of those children, so we also have a long way to go and are intent on one day reaching our goal of serving each and every one of those children. Not only have these children experienced the abuse and neglect that they've incurred, but they've also, many of them, experienced displacement. They have been removed from everyone and everything that they know and placed in a bureaucracy that's filled with well-intended people, but it's not a system that's designed to ensure that children ultimately do not slip through the cracks. I was in foster care, as Tanya mentioned, for 5 years earlier on in life, and between 1975 and 1980. And that experience really shapes who I am today, and I think about it every day. Not only had I experienced the abuse or neglect that led me to entering into the system, but I also experienced abuse in the very system that is designed to protect children. So that's why I'm in front of you tonight. We can do a lot better for our children. We have accepted marginal care for these children for way too long. What CASA does is something, like I said earlier, that no other organization does. What we do is, through juvenile courts, all of our volunteers are appointed by judges, ultimately to look after kids while they're in this system. Our volunteers, with the legal authority that judges provide them, advocate inside and outside the courts. They're providing courts with updated information so that our courts are making well-informed decisions about the safety and well-being of children. And they're also advocating outside of the courtroom with school professionals, mental health providers, medical providers, to make sure that no need slips through the cracks for these children. Every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and that these children receive the quality of care that we would expect for our own children. Ultimately, our goal is that each child in foster care ends up in a safe and permanent home, whether that is back with their birth families or with a guardian or adoptive parent. However, some of our children will ultimately age out of the system. It is also our intent that no child at 18 ages out of the foster care system without a safe and consistent adult to continue to support them as they become young adults. I mentioned that I experienced the system firsthand, the worst of it and the best of it. I also am privileged enough to have had a CASA in my own life for my son. This is my son. My son came to me when he was 5 years old, and I was an instant father within a couple months, a single father. And the first 6 months was very, very difficult. I'm not going to kid you. There were times where I wondered whether I could actually do this, whether I could parent this child long term. My son came to me at 5 years old, not being able to put more than 2 words together in a sentence. We would drive together, and I would desperately try to communicate with him, and he communicate with me. And as I said, it was very difficult not to be able to communicate with your child. My son's CASA Casey, my son's CASA Casey, was really the bright light in our lives during that time. She was calling me on a regular basis. She was Facebooking me. She was calling my son. She ensured that my son got speech therapy to develop in his speech. She made sure that he had mental health counseling to address not only the trauma that brought him into being in foster care, but quite frankly, the trauma that he experienced in 8 foster homes by the time he was 3.5 years old. This is our adoption day of 2 years ago. My son will be 9 years old in a couple weeks, and now I can't get him to stop talking. And he is really the bright light in my life, and his CASA is still involved with us 2 years after our adoption, still encouraging us as our biggest cheerleader. That's what CASAs can do. Thank you. And really, the recipe is very simple. Child protection workers often have 20 children and their families and all the providers to communicate with. CASAs have 1 child or sibling group to look after. The reality is when a child has an adult that is very closely paying attention and advocating for them as if they were their own child, better things happen to our kids. Our children are more likely to receive critical services while in foster care. They're more likely to perform better in terms of their education. They're more likely to end up in a safe and permanent home and be adopted if they are languishing in foster care. And if they do age out of the foster care system, they're more likely to graduate high school and go to college due to that support that their volunteer is providing. So 148 out of 1,830 is simply not enough. So over the next 2 years, we are going to continue to grow as an organization. Our board is committed, our staff is committed. We're going to increase our number of volunteers substantially, the number of children we serve. We're going to keep determining how we can be a more effective program. And we are going to try to, and that's why it's so important for the people to be in this room tonight, try to increase public awareness. The reality is generation after generation of foster youth are overlooked by our community, and that really needs to stop. And so that's why we're also here tonight and so glad to be here. So the 60 children we served in 2012 to the 148 we served last year was a big jump, but as I said, we are not done yet. And what that will mean is that will mean an increase in our budget over the next 2 years, which is why we're here. And that will mean a $925,000 budget by the year 2019. So what I'm hoping tonight is that many of you will think about even just one way that you can get involved to really build a support network for these kids who have been invisible and voiceless for a long, long time. And whether you become one of our 175 CASA volunteers by the year 2019, you make a personal contribution or get your business involved, or you spread the word and help us in some other way in kind support or increasing public awareness. I really look forward to talking to hopefully many of you during the last hour tonight. And I just want to say thank you again for stepping forward in this important way and being here. Thank you.